to call this meeting of the Anacortes Planning Commission to order. Ms. Gleichman, would you please take the roll?
Commissioner Mills.
Present.
Commissioner McCombs. Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Commissioner Martin.
Present.
Commissioner Stoneman.
Here.
Commissioner Jaretsky.
Here.
Commissioner Courier.
And we've been told that Mr. Courier will do his best to show up, but he will come later. But we do have a quorum. So item number 2 are minutes. We don't have any minutes at this time. I want to just make sure that I have this right. These are the minutes that I think are due. June 25th, August 14th, August 28th, September 11th.
Yes. And
Okay.
the June ones are already ready for the next meeting on October 2nd and trying to get more added to that.
Okay. Okay. Item number 3 is public comment. This is a time for any member of the public to speak to any item that's not on the agenda. And we'll be happy to hear you. We ask that you give your name and your city and come up to the microphone.
So good evening, Rob Peterson. I'm also the Executive Director for Fidalgo Pool and Fitness Center, which is kind of why I'm here. I know you guys are getting the initial changes in some of the designation. I'm just hoping that you'll support us as we try and move the land use to public use for the Fidalgo Pool lands that they're kind of more recognize what they're for. And just to let you all know that I am available for any questions if anybody has between now and as you move forward with this process.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Kathleen Lawrence Flanagan from Anacortes here. I'm just wondering, can you just speak to the process for tonight? Like what? Sure, go away. Okay.
Did you say I will? You will speak to the process. Okay. Kathleen, I missed your last name. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Not hearing any. Item number 4 is public hearings, and we do not have any public hearings at this time. So item number 5, 2025 Comprehensive Plan Update, Preliminary Amendment Proposals for the Land Use and Housing Elements. And we have Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Chair Martin. My name is John Coleman. I'm the Director of the Planning, Community, and Economic Development Department. Tonight we are going to have a presentation from makers about the 2025 preliminary amendment proposals for the land use and housing elements. And before we get into that, I thought it would be important for me to explain kind of the process that we're going through overall, and then of course for tonight. So I did want to clarify that through the how the comp plan process is going to proceed, we're going to be bringing digestible amounts of material to the Planning Commission for the Planning Commission to review, and of course for the public to also review. Our goal is to present information, background information, and like early preliminary information, like proposed changes to the elements. So right now we're working on the land use element and the housing element. And starting October 9th, we'll be getting into the transportation element. So again, we're just presenting background information and our preliminary proposals for amendments to these elements, giving then time before we have an actual public hearing on it. But although the information's out there and we're of course accepting public comments, but we're not presenting like formal, this is what we're ready to present as like our full list of everything that we're gonna change to each element. We're kind of bringing them to you in pieces. Our intent is to largely go through the comprehensive plan elements and update the policies and goals, and then also in those houses, also in each element is of course background information about what each element addresses. Like the land use element talks about the various zoning designations that we have. It has our future land use map in it. It has a list of city facilities, and then so updating all of that information too. Now that's different. Updating the elements is different than updating the development regulations, which is generally our zoning code. So we're starting with the housing elements. It's a little bit confusing because development regulations and the housing element goals and policies, work together. So over the past two meetings, you notice that we brought to you the housing action plan recommendations, which is a mixture of housing element changes and actual development regulation changes. And what the Planning Commission has assigned to themselves to review is largely development regulation changes. So I wanted to kind of explain how we're going to try to take this on. Is first, we intend to talk about, have the Planning Commission review the changes to the elements, and then later come back with more of the development regulation changes after we talk about these higher level goals and policy changes, and then get into the development regulation changes later. It just made sense though with the housing action plan to mix them up. And so I apologize if that's confusing, that we're working on development regulations and changes to the elements at the same time. It's just kind of the nature of it's hard to discuss one without the other, but we're going to make a more conscious effort to focus more on keep that clear differentiation as we go through. Like today we're going to be talking about housing element changes and land use element changes. That's going to be the process that we continue to go through. We'll bring you an element and we'll talk about the changes that we want to that are recommended in that. Again, present it once, maybe twice in a general forum like this, and then have a public hearing on it at the end when we've got something more formal to look at, and go through the elements each that way. When we have our public hearings, we're not going to be asking for final recommendation from the Planning Commission, because each element is not, while they are standalone chapters, so to say, in the comprehensive plan, they all work together. It's part of one book. They need to make sense together. So after we go through all of the elements, then when we anticipate to getting through all of the elements in late winter, the timelines change as things take longer or speed up. And that's when we're anticipating having the climate element is the last one that is going to be getting the final look at. There's checkpoints all along that we'll be working on the climate element, include the Climate Policy Advisory Team, that we're calling the Climate Team, had its first meeting yesterday to really kick off that process. So we're going to go through all of the elements, make recommendations along the way, just to make sure that the Planning Commission is feeling like we're going in the right direction. But then after all of the elements are done in the late winter, maybe spring, probably more like spring, we'll bring all of them together and make sure that you're able to review them comprehensively. That's the whole idea of the comprehensive plan. It does all of those elements work together. And we know that the climate element policies and goals are going to affect land use policies and goals, and possibly capital facilities land use and goals, and definitely transportation, the transportation element also, and maybe other elements too. We'll find out as we develop the climate element more and know how it's going to integrate with the rest of them. So it is a challenging task to try to take on piece by piece, but we also don't want to just hand you an entirely revised comprehensive plan and say, okay, here, in 2 weeks, come back and let us know what you think. Plus, we need a lot of time to work on this. This is a lot of work for not just staff, but the various consultants that we have working on this. So, as I mentioned, but I'd like to highlight, comments on all the comprehensive element changes and anything that we talk about, anything that we haven't talked about, we're accepting comments all the way through the process until we get to, the final public hearings and are moving on with recommendations. As far as what we are working on now is we're going to have a presentation from makers, and they're going to be talking about the land use and housing elements. That in part of the land use isn't just the goals and policies, it's also the future land use map, which you'll see the term FLUM, which is a fun little acronym to say FLUM. You'll probably hear a bunch tonight. So part of the future land use map changes is those are the requests from the public to change zoning on their property. And so we have several of those, and we'll present those tonight. We're not going to be hearing from the applicants tonight because they've presented at the council at the docketing hearing. They have information in the packet here. We're just introducing them, and we intended to have them come and give presentation to the Planning Commission at a future meeting. We have not determined that date. It could be as possibly as soon as the end of October, but it's also more likely to be November 6th. And when we get to the planning department update part of the agenda after this presentation, we want to talk to you about some of the future special dates that we're asking, because there's a lot of work to be done, so we're anticipating a special meeting October 2nd, so that's next week. And then special meeting, we can't have one on the 16th because this room's unavailable. Then November 6th, and possibly, what was that? Ooh, I've lost my other notes. Somewhere around October 30th might be another one. So we'll talk about more of that later. So do you have any questions about how we're going to bring these elements in pieces for you to review and then have hearings on? And then we'll be more judicious about explaining when we're bringing a suite of development regulation changes that kind of makes sense. We'll bring those when it makes sense for them to be brought to you. But the housing action plan stuff is going to lead to a lot of those. Any questions about any of that?
Okay, no, doesn't look like any questions. I wanted to say before you get going, I really appreciated the background, all the information at the beginning of the packet. Nicely laid out, clearly laid out, I thought. The question is, so tonight we're going to hear from makers, we're going to go through these land use and housing elements and just talk about possible changes. And the question is, what would you like, what would be the end goal from the Planning Commission tonight?
Tonight is information only, so ask as many questions as you like. We're not going to be making any recommendations, and we'll be bringing this back to you in a format that's going to be like these are the specific changes We've kind of done that here, what are the specific changes, but we'll bring it back, if we don't get it all the way through it, if you have a bunch more questions, we've left room on our scheduling to continue this conversation at possibly the October 2nd meeting, or a future one after that. The October 9th one is dedicated to transportation, so we're not entirely sure how much room we'll have on that one for other agenda items.
You have on this agenda the October 9th as transportation and land use, housing. So it's probably just in case there's any need to continue.
Yeah. Sorry, we have a lot of agendas around. Apparently, don't have
So we do have in our packet specific language and specific language recommendations. And, you know, I'm imagining the PowerPoint presentation will be about those. Yes. Okay.
Yes, the planning commission asked for recommendations, but we're not asking for the planning commission to make any recommendations today. We'll hold that off until after we have a public hearing. But this is their first touch at it, because there's a lot here.
Okay. Is there going to be any information about the racially disparate impact report? Because that's referenced many times throughout this land use and the housing, actually.
Well, that's a good question for Marcus. And if not, I think we've presented it to the Planning Commission on previous occasions and discussed it. I know it's been discussed, maybe they discussed it at a city council meeting then. It has been presented. I get the meetings mixed up.
Yeah.
So if we need to have some presentation about that as well, we can. Something to keep in mind for one of our future meetings where there's time to talk about additional things that the Planning Commission wants to talk about.
Okay.
That's all I have to present as far as tonight's meeting. I think if Marcus, you're ready, or would you like to take over and
Can take over if my number's called. Let's go. I'm ready. Let me set up presentation for everyone.
Marcus, I do have a question before you get started.
Yes, go ahead.
So we have a packet, and in our packet, there are all of the different elements and recommendations, but there is no PowerPoint. So I see that we received today, or just now, I think somewhere in here, is a PowerPoint. But is it going to be different from our packet? Can we use our packets as the guide? Or am I going to?
You should be able to use the packets as a guide. The purpose of the PowerPoint is, instead of running through every single thing that's within your packet, is to kind of pull out some key themes and updates in the presentation slides. So I'm going to first touch on the updates that are in the future land use map. And so there will be some graphics and images there for everyone to see. And I think you should have in your packet a future land use map
Yes.
document. And then we will move to the land use goals and policy updates. And there I will just be pulling out themes and some examples that I pulled out in particular. And then we can, during the discussion portion, we can run through the land use element kind of table document. If there's any questions on any one that was necessarily in the presentation, we can discuss those. I'll have one over here on my side as well. And same thing with the housing element, the goals and policies. I pulled out some examples
Okay.
to touch base on and to kind of give the public a sense of where the general themes of the updates are coming from, but not to run through every single one, because that would be a very long presentation. Okay. Let me Okay, has everyone seen the slides?
Yes.
All right. And I'm good to go? I'm good to start now? No more questions?
Right ahead.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, and Planning Commission. I'm Marcus Johnson. I'm an associate planner at Makers Architecture Urban Design, and Makers is helping this city update the comprehensive plan. So as I mentioned in the lead up, some of the discussion items today, I'm going to touch base on draft 2025 updates to the future land use map. There won't be too many major changes there, but we want to run through those updates. And then I'll call out key themes that you'll see in the draft land use goals and policies, and key themes um, that were updates to the draft housing goals and policies as well. Um, and as John already kind of gave a brief overview already, this is just kind of the preliminary first view of the land use element and housing element updates, and some things that can come down the line or be further opportunities for the public to review over the next few months before other updates are made to it is, and these things can come out of the climate element. So we expect from climate element work, land use planning approaches that help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which would then change some features or some maybe add some new policies that you don't see tonight, but will be in the maybe possibly in the future land use element. Special policies to support environmental justice, policies to reduce and mitigate risks to lives and property posed by wildfire and other natural hazards. And then also, again, just a consistency check with relevant countywide planning policies. So these are things to just keep in mind that will be in the future, potentially in the future, but you're not necessarily going to see too many of these related topics in tonight's updates. So what we have here on the screen is the current land use map for the city of Anacortes. This is what has been in place since 2016. And then quickly as we switch over, this is what the updated future land use map updates would look like for this 2025 comprehensive plan update. And so I've tried to create some markers on the map just to kind of give an indication of where these changes would be happening, along with a legend over on the left-hand side that will go into more detail in the following slides. And as you can see, as I mentioned before, not too many major changes, very similar to the current land use map, but there will be some small changes and parcels potentially changing from one land use designation to another land use designation. So just to zoom in, the first future land use map update, or update 1, would be looking at changing the what is currently RLD2 to RMD. It's this area right here, number 1, with this kind of like panhandle type of shape. And here, this change here is to, 1, support current housing policy 1.7, which is to provide for development of multifamily housing in areas close to shopping, employment, services, and public transportation. As has been presented at the 2 previous meetings, we are there's an exploration of neighborhood commercial areas and existing grocery stores. And so there's an existing grocery store actually in this area on this kind of corner right here. I hope you can see my mouse a little bit. Is kind of on the southeastern portion of that red box off of Commercial Ave. And being near Commercial Ave or off of Commercial Ave, this area is has some pretty close proximity in walking distance to current transit services. And so this is also intended to support neighborhood commercial areas as a concept, which we'll get into the next slide as well, and it has been presented in other areas. Um, I do think it's important to note that the eastern portion of this area does have proximity to a stream, which should be taken into account. And so, which is part of the reason why this shape looks the way it does, instead of it being kind of a clean box, because the stream runs kind of in this area on this eastern portion right here. We kind of wanted to respect that stream buffer right there and leave that area cropped out, but still provide some opportunity for um, more customers within walking distance to a current grocery store and potentially other commercial amenities in the area.
Well, while he's pausing, does the planning commission have any questions about the difference between the future land use map and the zoning map? Because the designations are different on each. He's talking about, in that past slide, RLD, which is residential low density versus residential medium density. And those correspond to different zones on the zoning map. So if you have any questions, please let us know.
Sure. Can you just correlate those real quick? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so residential low density is going to include the R1 zone and the R2 zones. So there's R2 and R2A. The residential medium density is the R3 zones, R3 and R3A. And Libby wants to jump in.
So they're on the chart in attachment B. There are all of the land use designations listed along with the implementing zoning designations. As John mentioned, the residential low density one corresponds with the R1 zoning district. Residential low density 2 is R2 and R2A and so on.
Thanks.
Thank you, Marcus.
All right. And yeah, so then update 2 is, as mentioned before, neighborhood commercial options. So this is again looking for ways to implement current land use policy 6.5, which is allow some compatible non-residential uses in residential zones, such as scaled schools, neighborhood grocery stores, religious facilities, parks, open spaces, senior centers, daycares, etc. So currently, so there's 2 options that we are kind of playing around with, have been proposed as things for the public and and planning commission to consider. Is option 1, which is kind of correlates more with the map, is to add neighborhood commercial overlays that symbolize areas with special allowances for small commercial uses. So see over here on the map, labeled as 2, there's a couple of new overlays, and there's current overlays already on the land use map that connect to things currently. So you have a medical overlay, or RHD medical, and a live work overlay. And so this would be kind of borrowing the same type of concept, but doing something for neighborhood commercial areas. And then the second option is to not symbolize something on the map, but instead to look at the zoning code and update permitted use charts within the zoning code to allow more neighborhood scale commercial uses. And so no symbology would be needed to be added to the map, but changes would happen within kind of the zoning code framework without land use map changes. Just things to consider there. And the remaining changes on the land use map are things that were requested by different stakeholders and people of the public and property owners. And so I've listed them out here in terms of 3 and 4. So update number 3, you see Port of Anacortes requested a land use designation change from one parcel from aeronautical zone to light manufacturing. You can kind of see this faint red area parcel right here that is currently zone aeronautical zone but is very similar to this light manufacturing. So it would just kind of complete this area right here. Update 4, Fidalgo Pool and Recreation District requested land use designation change from for multiple parcels from which are currently residential medium density designation to public designation. And so it would kind of take into account all of these parcels that are outlined in the black. Number 4. Update number 5 is a requested land use designation change of a parcel from industrial to residential medium density. And so it's this kind of area right here. And this was part of the, I guess, part of the 2021 docket as well. So this is something that's been in the works potentially, or a proposal that's been in the works for a while. You have Port of Anacortes also requesting land use designation change from light manufacturing to manufacturing and shipping. So it's just this small kind of parcel right here for continuity between this area would be was the proposed update to the land use map in this area for update 6. Update 7 is Port of Anacortes requested a land use designation change of multiple parcels that are currently commercial and marine mixed use. So these parcels in the black outline over here on the top, and change those to commercial marine and match kind of this other shade of pink up here, or this kind of beige color up here in this area, and kind of make all of this within the commercial marine as part of that request. Update number 8 to the future land use map is looking at adding all of the unincorporated Anacortes community forest land parcels. So these are parcels owned by the city of Anacortes, but are within the unincorporated area of Anacortes, and just moving those parcels to the kind of urban growth area within the unincorporated area, and just making that kind of that change and update there. And update number 9 would be expanding the UGA to include Signal Hill properties. So you'll see over here in number 9, in this area, you kind of have these properties down below south of this RHD mixed use business area that currently exists within the city boundaries, and would be looking to expand that area.
So let me pause here again, Marcus. So these two, number 8 and number 9, are actually urban growth area expansion requests. So that's not something, we can't just change our future land use map to expand our urban growth area. We actually need to go through a process through Skagit County through their comprehensive plan update process. So I've already submitted an application with them, with the county, letting them know that these are requested to us, yet the county understands that we have not done a review process yet. So I just kind of got our foot in the door. These two in particular, we will need to accelerate the process for. And, you know, I had spoke earlier about us not making any formal recommendations. These two recommendations, we need to get a formal recommendation from the Planning Commission and the City Council to get to the county so that they can continue their review of the process, because they want to get going on their their urban growth area and land use map changes. So our intent is to, in later October or possibly early November, hear from the applicants and in detail and have robust public review of these two requests, and then get that to the city council, so probably or later this year, so that they can pass a resolution stating whatever they would like to do with that and get it to the county. The county would have liked to have done this already, but we just have not been ready to do so yet. So this is kind of the exception to all of what I was talking about earlier, where we'll be looking for formal recommendations on these two future land use map updates.
Thanks, John. Good clarification there. Important clarification there.
Chairman Martin.
Mr. Mills?
Excuse me, Marcus, I want to ask John a question if I might. I have questions on 3 or 4 of the 9 proposals. I assume that we'll be hearing from the applicants on not just number 9 because it's accelerated, but the others as well. So we should hold those questions for when we have the applicant available to us. But who's the applicant for number 8?
The city. Those are city-owned properties, and because they're city-owned properties, we would like to have them within city limits and not outside of city limits. So the first step for a property that is not already an urban growth area, if you want land that's not in the urban growth area to be included in the city, first you have to get it included in the urban growth area, and the urban growth area is set by the county commissioners through their comprehensive plan updated process. And then after an urban growth area expansion is approved, then the owner can petition for it to annex into the city.
So will we be discussing that one further as well?
Yeah, there's not much to discuss. It's all land that's been owned by the city and acquired for ACFL uses, with the exception of number one on the west side of the ACFL, which is was donated to the city or granted to the city for a very little price. That's not quite ACFL, but is used for trails. So most of it's been acquired for ACFL, so there's not a whole, and it would not be used for housing or commercial or anything. It would be used for open space, with the exception of that one that is a former pit, and we'll get into the details of that.
Yeah,
the city uses it for
I can wait.
storage of gravel and stuff.
I just wanted to make sure we were going to touch on it in more detail.
Yes.
I think we have a question from Mr. Dretsky.
Yeah, excuse me, just a clarification. It says add all unincorporated Anacortes community forest land parcels to the urban growth. We're talking about all the ones designated with the 8, correct?
Yeah.
Because it says add all, so.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority is already in the city limits, and which is within the, of course, within the urban growth area. It's just the ones with the green hash that have been acquired since since the ACFL and the city limits were established. We've been continuing to acquire properties for the ACFL.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.
All right. So those are all the future land use map updates there, and now beginning into the land use goal and policy, updated goals and policies. And as I mentioned before, I kind of just want to pull out some general themes that you might see within those updates, rather than run through every single one of the updates. And so there'll be some minor verbiage or language updates to goal and policy language to use maintain more often. This is just to capture the fact that a good number of goals and policies were addressed since 2016, especially in the 2019 code update. And so it's really an opportunity to just softly change the language to maintain, make sure that the intention of those goals are being kept moving forward into the future, and that as things change, there's some type of evaluation and ability to adjust things if need be. Other themes include policies to be removed, addition of new policies, and then also I wanted to flag at least one example where there might be policies that we've currently have just kept. They're in different kind of sections of the land use goals, of the land use element. But there might be opportunities, there might be duplication of policy or very similar policies in different sections. And so there might be opportunity for either consolidation or just some input on whether what we have there works or whether we should consider combining things. So as I mentioned, land use updates to maintain as a kind of a big push there. As I mentioned, many zoning and design policies were implemented with the 2019 development regulation update, and so we just wanted to capture those. So here's some examples, with one being land use 2.1, where maintain user-friendly and objective design standards for commercial and multifamily development that emphasize the concepts below. Another key aspect of this one is just to build in some periodically evaluation of the adopted standards. So making sure that the intention of these standards are meeting both kind of the built outcomes that were desired, but also are continuing to hear community feedback and make sure that if design standards in the future potentially need to change due to new desires, that it's already embedded within the goal, within the policies to do so. Land use 3.2, another example of kind of just maintaining zoning regulations to balance the need to accommodate anticipated growth while preserving the city's historic resources. So there's some examples of removed policies, and these policies are removed for different reasons. And so the top example 3.3 is really just more both a combination of this policy hasn't been implemented yet, and through conversation, just that there might be limited staff and budget capacity to address this in even within the next coming years, and also that there are other tools and resources for entities to use, like the local Historic Preservation Board and the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, as possible resources to provide guidance on design for historic buildings without having to codify those standards within the code. So that's the reason for the proposed option here. Another example, land use 6.2. So this is kind of what was mentioned earlier in the meeting, kind of a recognition and recommendation from the racially disparate impact analysis and Department of Commerce guidance, kind of looking to move away from the term character when possible, due to the historical context in which character has been used to exclude people of color from certain neighborhoods and cities in certain situations. And so that's the reason for that. But also in this example right here, not only is it the racially disparate impact analysis, but as been presented at other meetings, many of the proposed changes coming from the Housing Action Plan are looking at ways of increasing housing options and housing choice in many more parts of the city, and that includes things that are not single-family houses, but middle housing like duplexes and townhomes and triplexes as well in many different areas. So areas that are, currently or historically single-family neighborhoods, if proposed changes with the HAP strategies go by, will be no longer single-family neighborhoods. And so having a policy directly linked to that may not be necessary anymore. new policies, some example of new policies included within the land use goal and policy. So annually reviewing, annually review zoning regulations to ensure continued compliance with changes in the state law, included and not limited, and I cut this off, but I think this is included and not limited to the Growth Management Act, the GMA amendments. And so this is just a observation over the last few years that the legislature, the state, has shown an interest in doing new laws, particularly affecting housing. And so just a policy that the city is going to be paying attention and looking to make sure that they are compliant with state laws that potentially might change over time. Another example here, adopt enforceable development regulations which designate heritage buildings and prohibit demolition by neglect. And this was an item that was in the city council resolution right here. And this third example is another one that was city council interest, but also something we heard a lot of public feedback and a lot of public interest in, which was to explore full or partial pedestrianizing of streets in downtown and South Commercial Avenue to enhance public experience and economic vitality. So these are some examples of new policies that have been proposed in this first draft. And as I mentioned before, here's an example of potential too similar policies or duplicity. This first one is really just, as was mentioned before, is kind of looking at neighborhood commercial areas, so allowing compatible non-residential uses in residential zones, such as grocery stores and religious facilities and daycares, and making sure they're compatible with the neighborhood. And similarly, we have another policy later on in land use 10.1, which is to adopt development regulations and design provisions that facilitate a complementary mix of uses within neighborhoods and provide for safe and attractive non-motorized connectivity. So in one case, the reason why we kept it is because we think the focus and the addition of walking and biking and non-motorized connectivity between uses and amenities is a different enough change that can allow for these two, but also realizing that the first half of 10.1 is very similar to the policy in land use 6.5. So there are a handful, not that many, but there's policies within the remaining proposals that are like that, and feedback on what your thoughts are in terms of whether there's too much similarity or whether they're fine would be helpful going forward. And then the last section is the housing updated goals and policies. And so again, some themes here that you'll notice and that you also noticed in the land use. So language revisions to reference the housing action plan work, updates responding to racially disparate impacts, the racially disparate impact analysis and other HB 1220 requirements, so other state requirements. And then we'll also have a handful of additional new policies in the housing one. So no real elimination of current housing policies as a theme, but addition of new policies and then some updates to language as well. Language updates include, as mentioned before, just kind of referencing the housing action plan. It was a recent major project the city completed, and just making sure that over time, the strategies in the HAP that are decided to move forward on, as we've been discussing in the previous two meetings, those strategies are implemented over time and they're not forgotten. So we have examples here, one related to metrics. So achieving the measurable metrics and strategies, and then achieving those metrics and making sure the metrics include homeownership rates, housing cost burden for people of color, and other statistics recommended by the Housing Action Plan and by the RDI analysis as well. And then similarly, 6.1 is just, again, very small change, adding Housing Action Plan as being achieved within the policy language. Here are some examples of changes that were coming directly from racially disparate impact analysis and also 1220. So to start with the racially disparate impacts, RDI, you have housing 1.2, which is, again, to promote a variety of housing options that are needed by the different demographic groups and life situations in Anacortes. So very similar to the past language, but would include example of young families, single parents, seniors, people of color, professionals, and service workers as well. As updated language, and Housing 4.6 would update its language to include and be consistent with requirements in 1220, which require the city of Anacortes to allow development of emergency shelters, transitional housing, emergency housing, and other permanent supportive housing in certain zones that are based on the law. So places that zones that allow hotels kind of have to allow for different emergency and transitional housing, and similarly, some residential areas will also have to allow for these types of uses to be consistent with the state law. And new policies or new goals and new policies. So you'll see over here on this in some examples of here, maintain development regulations that permit allowed residential uses by right and avoid conditional uses. This was something that was city council expressed interest in this policy as well. And not only does it do that, but the policy also helps reduce confusion from applicants. So those looking to build new housing or do a new permit or some type of use on land that they own. And it also helps speed up the aspects of the permitting process. So it helps from the staff perspective as well, not having to determine what's conditional, and making it very clear about what's allowed by right and what's not allowed, essentially. Housing goal 2, as you see there, has been updated. Again, this is kind of reference from the RDI analysis and guidance from that document as well. And so to keep the same intent of the current policy, we just switched out the term character for form, and also wanted to integrate some new language that city council was expressed interest in terms of allowing for organic change of neighborhoods over time to meet community needs while preventing neighborhoods from experiencing extreme changes in a short period of time. This goal links to the last example I have on the page, which is when necessary to meet housing needs over time, provide zoning changes that allow the next increment of housing throughout any neighborhood in Anacortes. So these things in tandem are really just looking at kind of the future of Anacortes and trying to create goals and policies that allow for more housing options, more housing choices within the city of Anacortes, and to allow those changes to happen over time in kind of a organic or slow way, basically not have any neighborhood experience extreme changes in their feeling of the neighborhood, but to allow more housing options and housing choice within those neighborhoods.
Marcus, if I could weigh in on, so yeah. These are kind of important goals, or maybe shouldn't characterize them as important, but they'll have an impact in when we look at our land use changes. Like if we are making changes to the zoning code to change what types of housing might be allowed, this would, having this policy would say, we want to not have large jumps from being a, only single family neighborhood to allowing high-rises. Like, that would be a jarring jump. So trying to this actually is intended to give the community some assurance that large-scale changes aren't, we're not looking to make large-scale changes to people's neighborhoods. We're looking to try to accommodate housing and make incremental changes to do so. And it also speaks to one of these was talking about more by right uses instead of conditional uses. We've had comments about, in the past we did a lot of conditional uses. And right now, we still have the ability as the city to put conditions on things, but in the past, the zoning regulations weren't specific enough to guide development. So it was often left as a conditional use. So like every time somebody came in to do something on their land, it would have to go through a public hearing process. And it just could be very subjective because there weren't good sidebars on it. And so it was a long process that, and it's an uncertain process, and the city would in many ways be reinventing the wheel every time they reviewed a similar project. Our zoning code, especially since 2019, is far more sophisticated, this was done with the intent of making it easier for everybody that looks at the zoning code and lives in a neighborhood to know what is allowed and what is not allowed and what they can expect in their neighborhood, instead of going through a conditional use permit process where you never know what the outcome might be because there weren't, through the conditional use permit process, there often isn't enough specificity to what is allowed. So the conditional use of the by right, by putting more information in the code and allowing it by right instead of by condition, the intent is to make it also easier for people that want to develop their property to just know what the rules are going to be. So if they can look at our zoning code, which includes design standards and specific setbacks and heights and bulk standards, like how it needs to look, all of that is in the code now, where none of that existed before. So instead we would have boards and commissions review it to make sure that it met all these things. Now we've done all the work ahead of time, and that's kind of the purpose of having a more specific development regulation code like we installed in 2019. And we can make tweaks to that if it's not doing what the city wants. But you can see that these the goal to, or the policy to avoid conditional uses in particular in the long run is something that the council is intentionally doing but with the stated intent that we'll make it very clear for what development is going to look like. And this process is the process by which the community gets the feedback into how those development regulations are going to look. So it's really important for people to be reviewing this now, and it's also important to know that we're trying to avoid big impacts to neighborhoods and do smaller step increases in neighborhoods. Does that make sense?
I have two thoughts. First of all, and you've done a nice job of explaining the difference between our current policies, procedures for developments, doing it on a one-by-one basis. And I see the fairness as being a plus, but I also see the lack of community input as being a minus. Things that are approved by right don't have the input of the community. Also, I see it as a minus when you're talking about taking away the idea of planned unit development. I see another minus in the lack of ability for creativity. And I think that that's something that we have benefited from in the past. So there's good and bad to what we're doing now. My other comment was on H2. I think it's H2. As I look at the language, I appreciate the thought. My question is how it would be operationalized.
So as we develop our zoning code, if we make any zoning code changes, like I said, we would not do things like allow large apartment buildings in what is currently a single-family neighborhood. Like that would be way beyond what the neighborhood would expect. So incremental changes would mean, you know, if now single families allowed, maybe duplexes and triplexes might be allowed by right under certain conditions. And that's always the caveat here is like the conditions are specified in the zoning code to make sure everybody knows how that goes. And as far as PUD goes, our subdivision standards were designed with enough flexibility to act similarly to a PUD. I don't know that is the feedback we received from council about when they got rid of the PUDs back in 2017. And instead they worked hard to create regulations that were flexible enough for a standard subdivision to allow the same idea. It's not entirely the same. Cottages are very much the same. You know, cottages are very similar to a PUD. You know, you leave open spaces, you're required open spaces, and you can cluster buildings. There is similar flexibility within the subdivision standards. And subdivisions, so larger applications such as subdivisions or substantial shoreline development permits, most substantial development, shoreline substantial development permits require conditional substantial development permit. And those do allow for conditions. So for larger projects, conditions are still a possibility and pretty typical. This is really, I think, meant to make these smaller middle housing, duplex, triplex, fourplex kind of stuff, and easier to build and take the conditional use permit process out of those middle housing, which is, you know, if we were a town over 25,000, is it? We would be required by the state to just allow them middle housing under a lot more circumstances. So we're fortunate that we still have the flexibility to do it the way that we think is going to be good for our community. So I know that's a topic that's coming up, and so I wanted to give some, that's come up a lot, and I wanted to show you that large subdivisions and shoreline substantial development permits, we still do have the ability to condition those.
Mr. Mills.
I would like to echo or provide my own perspective on putting more and more into by right. I think we need to be careful as we do that because if you open the choke too wide, you lose control of what comes for review by this commission or by the council. I understand the arguments for it. I'm not categorically against it, but I'm inclined to try to walk very carefully into that realm. Smoke is difficult to get back down the chimney.
Dretsky.
I guess I hate to be cynical here, but both of these allude to something that seems to me like it could easily create a whole lot of dispute. Allow organic change of neighborhoods over time well, my opinion of overtime might be very different than other people's opinion of overtime. And the next H21 basically says the same thing, when necessary to meet housing needs over time. Again, my opinion of overtime might be 10 years, and somebody else wanting to do something might think 90 days is plenty of overtime. Again, there's a degree of vagueness there that can be wide open for dispute.
So these are entirely, like, if you feel like the language isn't, the language as written doesn't achieve what I think the goal should be, you can recommend changes, absolutely. This isn't like with any of these goals and policies, there's an expectation that you write them in the way that you think it should be, and and that once you come to your whatever you decide on each of those, I don't know if you want to take when you do make such a change that, or on going through every one of these, I don't know if you want to say take a vote on every one of them. That might be a little challenging, but when you do figure out what you want on each of those, you do those, you'll make a recommendation ultimately to the council.
Thank you.
I guess when I received my packet, I took it as marching orders to look at each item and think about each item and have questions or comments about each one, which is what I did, thinking that's what we were doing tonight. So apparently we're not yet, but that's fine.
There's no reason that you can't. It's only 7:06. We've got plenty of time. If you want to go through these, maybe we should let Marcus finish his presentation.
Yeah.
But then if we wanted to go back and go through the full list, and if there was any that the Planning Commission wanted to start working on tonight, there's no reason that we can't. We have time unless Marcus goes for another hour, which I suspect.
We'll let Marcus finish, and then we'll see what the commission would like to do.
All right, great. I just want to mention one more kind of new policy that I couldn't fit on this screen here in this example, but I just wanted to note that the Housing Action Plan had a strategy or kind of a topic talking about short-term rentals, and I just want to mention that there's as well as a new proposed policy, at least at this stage, around short-term rentals, which is, and I'll quote, assure that short-term rentals do not affect the supply of long-term housing options, end quote. So I just wanted to make sure that's mentioned, as well, as I know that was something during the Housing Action Plan that people were concerned about, and it's not something that we'll make sure that the public knows that it's not forgotten. Okay, that closes out at next steps. As John already presented on, city staff's going to be working on other elements over the next few months. Sounds like transportation is next, and you'll have climate element in spring potentially, and ability to kind of come back after all of that and look at the whole comprehensive plan together as a whole, which we'll be able to look at. Again, we'll be able to review and have any further thoughts, proposals, comments, updates to the land use, housing, and future land use map as well, as those things will probably or could be informed by climate policies that come out of the climate element work as well. So with that, I will stop sharing. My presentation is done, and I will allow for the next step, discussion.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your work, and there's a lot. As you've said, as Mr. Coleman has said, yes, there's a lot here. What are your thoughts, commissioners? Mr. Ryan?
Yeah, a lot to go over, and when we're going over these on our time at home, obviously, and not necessarily always having to be able to reach out to our other commissioners due to restrictions. Is there a way that could we reach out to Mr. Johnson here, or do we reach out to you, John, for questions? To reach out to either Marcus or yourself for additional questions while we're going over this stuff?
Yeah, planning commission can reach out to staff with questions. Probably Libby or I.
Okay, thank you.
Here's a thought. We've got those nine different proposals that are docketed. Maybe it would be worthwhile just spending a few minutes discussing those. Would that be helpful?
Oh, the future land use map ones.
Right.
Yeah, if you have any questions, the applicants are gonna, like I said, we're gonna have the applicants available to answer questions and present at a future meeting. So,
So maybe not.
so maybe that's not the best one, but if you wanted
Yeah.
to go through, it might be better served to go through the housing or the land use goals, and start hashing out any ones that you want to go through.
What would you like to do, commissioners? Mr. Mills?
I don't know when we're going to lose Marcus, but I had a observation on the presentation
Okay.
in case we're going to lose him. I know the clock is running. Big picture, we mentioned definitions on the council, on the commission for over time. Needs to be understood what we're meaning there. A couple other terms that I spotted that could be problematic that we perhaps need to understand the definition for is bicycling. I ran into this as a Parks Board commissioner 15, 20 years ago when Segways came out, and now we have e-bikes. And as we probably may be more applicable when we get into the transportation with the amount of trails that we have here in town, both paved and off-road, to understand when we say bicycling, what the definition of a bicycle is. Are e-bikes a bicycle? I've biked with e-bikes and non-e-bikes in other states as recently as last week, where I ran across problems for the distinction between an e-bike and a regular bike being allowed uses. So I've put that out there for consideration. I mentioned the overtime that was brought up previously. We also like to use the word affordable housing. That's a challenging term for me because what's affordable to me is driven by the economic resources of the renter or the buyer. It's driven by interest rates. It's driven by supply and demand, obviously. And so we use the word, and I'm not sure how we're defining it. There's at least three definitions that I think would be helpful to be fleshed out at some point in the not too far future.
Yeah, I can give some thoughts to each of those right now, at least how we were thinking about it in terms of proposing. So I think on the overtime, that was I hear it was giving a generous feeling of what people think of overtime. So it is thinking about, we're setting these comprehensive goals and policies that are supposed to think about a comprehensive plan that is planning for stuff over the next 20 years, right? It's looking forward to 2045. And so over time is really meant to, in the most generous way, be thinking about, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the line when updates happen to the comprehensive plan. being able to look back at the past 10 years and see, have we been achieving the goals that we set forth 10 years ago? And if not, um, do we need to look at doing different things? So like if housing capacity, we have our, if there's a certain amount of housing that city of Anacortes is expected to be able to develop over the next 20 years to accommodate the increase in population over the next 20 years in the area, and also to take into account another term that you used, affordability or affordable, and making sure that homes are affordable to a larger swath or a greater sector of people, without having to be cost burden and having to spend more than 30% of their income towards housing. I think that's what the over time is meant to try to, in the most generous offering, trying to encapsulate, is trying to just think about a decade, 2 decades, since it's embedded within the comprehensive plan, and that's kind of the timeline in which we're thinking about things on the comprehensive plan as well.
So as far as affordable housing, it is defined in the Growth Management Act, so we could just say, if we want to specify growth management, we can just specify, affordable housing, parentheses, as referenced in the GMA. And I can't read that because I don't have my glasses. Would you mind reading what it is? Oh, I do have my glasses.
Sure. So affordable housing is defined in RCW 3670A030, and it says affordable housing means, unless the context clearly indicates otherwise, residential housing whose monthly costs, including utilities other than telephone, do not exceed 30% of the monthly income of a household. Oh, I'm going to go on for a while. Of a household whose income is A, for rental housing, 60% of the median household income adjusted for household size, as reported by HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, or for owner-occupied housing, 80% of the median household income adjusted for household size, for the county where the household is located, as reported by HUD.
Could you give me that reference number
Yep.
again?
RCW 36.70A.030, subsection 5.
Thank you.
And I'm not entirely sure, but also in the Housing Action Plan, there is a definition, but that wouldn't be referenced in our comprehensive plan. Hopefully it's similar to the GMA one. So, those are kind of easy fixes as far as defining something like that. If you could point out where we talk about bikes and bicycles, I don't know if in a comprehensive plan, if we need to be that specific about bikes and bicycles, because we're not talking about specific regulations for paths. We're just talking about allowing paths, for example, or encouraging. So I don't know if we need to. We could look through and see where reference to bikes and bicycles are, and see if it makes a difference. But it may not. I would hope that it wouldn't in a broader document like this, where we're just encouraging and saying, we'll make paths for multimodal is typically what we use now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Marcus. Like if we're talking about bikes, we might be talking about rollerblades and other non-motorized uses.
Yeah.
Multimodal may include smaller motorized things as well, such as e-bikes, non-cars.
Yeah. And just to add to what you're saying there, I think the reference from the presentation, at least, I think was maybe slide 16 with land use 10.1, which uses the current language, or the current policy uses at the end, encourage more walking and bicycling between uses. So that's the current policy. That's what's currently from the 2016 comprehensive plan. So that hasn't been recommended to be changed. I think the update to this language is to just say that is provide for safe and attractive non-motorized connectivity between uses and amenities that then encourage more walking and bicycling between uses.
Then we get into the argument of whether or not an e-bike is motorized. And there's 3 classes of e-bikes as well.
Yeah, there's 3 classes. Yeah, there's 3 classes. I'm an e-bike owner. I have one of the lower classes. I do the one that is the pedal assist bicycling. That's what type of thing. Not gearing towards motorcycle type of one. So the one that's capped 15 miles, 20 miles per hour, and is pedal assist type of thing.
Probably more relevant in the transportation element.
Well, Marcus, thank you again. I don't see anybody else with questions, and I think that we should move on to our planning department update.
So the planning commission doesn't want to go through any of these tonight and
Sounds like no.
okay. Well then, thank you, Marcus.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks. So I'm moving to item number 6, which is planning department update.
Okay, so that transitions well from what we were just talking about. So we wanted to talk about schedules and expectations for the planning commission. Seeing as that we got through everything that we wanted to get through tonight, we, at our next October 2nd meeting, we're having this is an additional meeting that is not was not originally scheduled to talk about our revised growth projections from the county. You probably remember on multiple times I've presented about our population projections and our out of those population projections are our housing projections and the housing by bands. So there was some reconciliation done at the county level. They're unable to handle some housing on the 0 to 50 AMI. I think it's 0 to 50 AMI. It may just be 0 to 30, but we're going to discuss the changes that they needed to make. And so what that ended up doing is moving some of the lower AMI into has to be accommodated in the cities. So that got dispersed out to each of the various cities, and it's a small number of units that is going to be reallocated back to the cities. So now I'm going to present the data on that, what the new figures are, but it's not eye-popping. It's a few, a dozen or so in each, the 0 to 30 and the 30 to 50, and then a commensurate lowering of the 120 to go back to the county, because the county can only handle 120 and above. So philosophically, that's kind of tough, but we'll explain the details and what those figures are. And we just wanted to bring it to the Planning Commission and the City Council to show what those final figures are. The Skagit Council of Governments Growth Management Act Steering Committee, which, as you probably all recall, is the regional, not quite governing body. It's a group that is the mayors from the cities and towns and the commissioners. They review all changes to the countywide planning policies and make a recommendation to the county, who ultimately makes the changes. So the steering committee reviewed it, and know, as each jurisdiction is going to bring it to our individual cities to re-review it, even though we've looked at it several times in its previous form. So that's what we're going to be talking about on October 2nd. I don't anticipate that to be all night. So we had put on here to continue the land use and housing discussion. So that would be reviewing the items that you have tonight, attachment B and C, I believe it are. I believe it is A, B, and C. In more detail, we won't have the opportunity to bring the land use petitioners in to talk about their petitions in a week from now. So it's going to be a little tough to talk about the future land use maps, but if we can continue this conversation about the draft housing goals and policy amendments and the draft land use policies and goals next week, does that sound good? And we also left time on that for the Planning Commission to talk about the results of their Housing Action Plan subcommittee reports, if you're ready to do that. So those are three things. I think that'll be a full meeting, but not a crazy all night. It sounds like from where we're at, it sounds digestible. Does the Planning Commission feel comfortable with that?
All heads nodding.
Thank you. And then October 9th is the transportation element, so and possibly additional land use and housing discussion. Sounds like we may not need that, but we'll have room on that agenda. That October 9th meeting will largely be a presentation from the Transpo, which is the consultant that's working on our housing element. Oh, sorry, the Transpo is working on our transportation element. Spoke there. And then October 23rd is the big open house that we've been trying to get the word out. Raise your hands if you've received the, I probably haven't got the A-Town yet, have you? Got yours today already? Or do you find it in the mail, or? So the A-Town magazines have gone out. It is almost exclusively about the comprehensive plan and how it affects each of the departments. There's some other stuff in there, of course, but that's the overarching theme is the comprehensive plan update. So that was part of our public participation plan to talk about the comp plan updates and get the information out there in A-Town. So hopefully you'll get those soon.
Mr. Coleman, may I ask a question about the open house? What is the goal for the open house? I understand public understanding of the process. Is that it?
It's well, we haven't figured out we have all of the agenda yet. The consultants are going to be giving presentations again. And so it's largely an opportunity for the public to come en masse and talk with staff, talk with the consultants, and it looks like Libby has some ideas. Are you trying to chime in?
So I think that there will again be a climate focus to the open house and also transportation. But as John mentioned, it's an opportunity for the public to learn about, the housing and land use element, proposed changes as well, and provide their feedback as part of that.
Just with the teaching background, the presentation, what we used to call in the olden days the sit and get, is not necessarily the best way to get input. And I would just plant the thought of something like a charrette type of a process might give people the opportunity to really dig in and really feel heard. That would be just an idea.
Thank you. Continuing on with the meeting date, after the open house on October 23rd, we're attempting to schedule a meeting in late October to talk about land use and housing. Perhaps we can move up the future land use map applications to that time, since we had on there land use and housing, but it sounds like after today's meeting, getting the impression that we might be able to finish that up. Your preliminary review of that on October 9th, if not on October 2nd. So we do want to have that special meeting in late October because we have a shoreline permit so remember the old days when you would review permits? It wasn't all planning, it wasn't all comprehensive plan all the time. Well, we've got one coming your way, and so we need to make room for that, and late October is when we anticipate it'll be ready for its hearing. So we had suggested October 22nd, which is a Tuesday. We had suggested October 24th, which is a Thursday, or October 30th, which is a Wednesday, for an additional planning commission meeting, and wanted to get your feedback on what dates work best for you.
I think I emailed you guys. I did have the conflict that I can do the 30th if we do that, but that won't be the other two.
I see somebody looking at schedules. Does the 30th work? It's another Wednesday.
No, 30th would work.
Okay, so I see here 2 that say the 30th works. 3. I think the 30th.
Thank you.
We'll wear our Halloween costumes. Yeah, and you can hand out candy.
So we will check in with our applicants and see if they're going to be able to come in and do the future land use map presentations. That's actually helpful to move that up earlier anyway, because it sounds like we don't need to talk about land use and housing, may not need to talk much about land use and housing. And then November 6th, we were going to continue any transportation element discussion based on how it goes on October 9th, and see if there's additional review that's necessary. Now, that would not be a public hearing, that would be just the regular, that would just be more presentation. So if that transportation element continued is not necessary, then we may not need that November 6th meeting, but don't get too excited to get your November 6th back yet. But we'll see if we can reduce that. And then November 13th is a regular meeting, and that's when we anticipate having the public hearing on land use, housing, transportation, and possibly another shoreline permit. So that's what's coming up before Thanksgiving, and then once we hit the holiday season, we're gonna have to back off a little, just because people get busy and we don't want to have too many meetings between Thanksgiving and Christmas. but we still need to get work done, so we will be having our regular planning commission meetings.
Anything else for the planning department update?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to mention that we have a transportation survey out, and we've had it up on our website. We've been advertising it on our PCED Facebook page, and so I just wanted to mention again, look for that transportation survey. You can just go to anacortes.org, and that'll take you to our 2025 update page, and it is on there. Also on that page is information about the CPAT meeting, the Climate Policy Advisory Team meeting, which now we are referring to as the Climate Team, because that sounds a lot better than CPAT, and actually explains more about what it is. So they met last night for their first meeting, and I think it went pretty well. Those meetings are open to the public to view, but they're, the climate team is working together and trying to work on goals and policies. So it's not open for a public comment kind of meeting. It's while it's not a formal meeting, there's no public comment, but people are welcome to view, and hopefully it was enlightening. I know that at least one of our planning commission members serves on the climate team, and one of our planning commission members was viewing it last night.
And just piggybacking on that, I would like to say thank you to those of you. There were 3 planning commissioners who said that they would be willing to serve on that committee, and the mayor, I believe, was the one who appointed, and he appointed Mr. Mills. So when Mr. Johnson is finished with his report, I'd like to ask Mr. Mills to give a quick update on what happened at the climate group.
You want to just go now, since we're talking about the climate team?
Yeah, and I've got my notes here, and I quickly changed Climate Policy Advisory Committee to team. Yes, our team was created by the City Council in a Resolution 3165. Our purpose in the resolution was to steward the development of the first climate element of the Anacortes Comp Plan and advise staff and the consultant team throughout the development of the climate element to ensure the work is informed by stakeholders and community feedback. Our first meeting was last night. It was 2 hours. It was virtual only. I was trying to figure out the technology to see if we had members of the public watching or not. I was never able to discern that, but it was open to the public. The committee had not met, so it was a good organizing session, and I must compliment staff and the mayor for the cross-section of people that they have obtained for the committee. We've got representatives from the port, refineries, school district, healthcare here in town, public transportation, and service and environmental organizations. So there was a lot of good comment right out of the box, and I learned quite a bit by sitting in there as well. There was 3 proposed meetings, the first of which was last night. In that meeting, we introduced ourselves to each other, spent a few minutes giving feedback on the guiding principles that the committee was to operate under. And then we spent probably at least an hour of the 2 hours reviewing, discussing, and providing feedback regarding asset inventory and the potential impacts and hazards that climate projections say we need to prepare for. Also, we got what I would call a high-level review of the greenhouse gases material that I think the City Council saw in more detail. Then we closed with discussing next steps. Discussion in the committee included that perhaps a 4th general meeting was needed to kind of wrap up the process, and also that the group consider having intermediate meetings in between the second and third meeting so that we could react and provide feedback as a committee rather than individually providing feedback. I would also mention, and I'm going to look at you, John, I understood that it was being recorded, so the members of the public or the commission or the council that were not listening in live, I understand it'll be available at some point on the city website for folks to reach out and catch up on that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thanks, that was a really excellent summary of a 2-hour meeting in just a couple of minutes. Thank you, that was excellent. So the last thing I have on planning department update is the city received, it was awarded, we haven't gotten the money yet, roughly $193,000 grant to improve our permitting software, how our online portal, which is called SmartGov, how it works, because it's been challenging for both staff and for the public. And so we've got money to do some of the money is for that, some is to work with consultants to help us document and clarify and create just an internal flow of development review so to make sure that each project that needs to go from the department to department is a clear and understandable written way for everybody to know what the process is. And also a large chunk of that is for digitization of existing paper documents. We've got a file room packed to the gills with paper of old planning commission documents and comp plan process documents and building permit files and building plans. This is going to be for largely the building permit stuff. So digitizing the documents that we need to access for building permit processes for older stuff. And scanning sounds like it should. Well, why can't you just hire an intern to scan it in and put it on your computer? Well, it turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. The scanning process itself, well, it takes time. Once you scan it in, you need to identify a lot of information in the digital filing system, saying what it is, what project is it, what was the date that it was approved, who is the owner, what is the address, all of these things that if you wanted to search for it, you need to know. And that's where it gets a lot more time consuming. So that's why it's expensive and time consuming. We can hire somebody to do that for us and get as much done as with the money that we've received. And so we're very excited. Rob Frisinger, our building official, he's the one that applied for this grant. So I'd like to say we owe Rob thanks for getting this done. So hopefully it'll improve our permitting system in the near term.
And who was the grant from?
The state.
From whom was the grant?
The Department of Commerce is the clearinghouse for a lot of the grants that we go for. It was called the paper to kind of misleading because it wasn't about scanning. They did allow a little bit of scanning, but it was really more for improving processes and permitting. And that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you very much. Anything else for the good of the order? Oh, Mr. Mills.
Seems like I'm talking a lot tonight. Two procedural things. One is for those of us who are over the age of 55, the Anacortes Senior College is offering a 3-week on Tuesday afternoons, 2-hour sessions on the Growth Management Act that is being presented by one of our city councilmen. And two comments. One is it seems like a good opportunity to brush up on whatever the reference was that you had for me, Libby, as well as other things. And if we probably should check at some point, if we have more than 2 of us that are enrolled in the class, we'll have some posting requirements because of open meetings.
I'm enrolled.
Oh, there's 2 right there. And then the other item I wanted to mention is, since we had a couple of absences tonight, procedurally, do we need to consider excusing those absences? Or would that be next week or next meeting?
I know they do that on the city council, but I don't know. Do we do that here?
Your new handbook probably identifies that. Under organization of the planning commission, it says if a commission member has more than 4 unexcused absences from regularly scheduled meetings in a calendar year, there's a remedy. So that would imply that you may want to excuse people.
Okay, it won't hurt. Is there a motion?
I move that we excuse the 2 absences.
And is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to excuse the absence of Mr. McCombs and Mr. Courier for tonight. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing that up. Also, just one more quick announcement. That short course on planning, it's an online course. It's free. It's tomorrow night. And I received a note today from them. So if you haven't signed up, it looks like you could still sign up if you wanted to. So just Google a short course on planning. You'll find it. And with nothing else, this meeting is adjourned, 7:47.